In this movie review segment of the First Response, we're going to be talking about X-Men Origins Wolverine. There's two perspectives that you can review this movie from. One is from a more popular perspective, people who are not familiar with the source material, and the other is people who are familiar with the comics and the characters and the TV show, and that's the perspective I'm going to be speaking from. I have tried to divorce myself from my childhood in this sense, but I just can't. I was practically raised on the X-Men TV show and the characters and everything like that. So when I'm watching a movie, I whether I like it or not, have certain expectations. And I think the producers of the film know this stuff. So they do reference and study the source material, and we'll talk a little bit about how that sort of plays into the enjoyment or the lack of enjoyment of this Wolverine movie. So first and most importantly, what's Wolverine and who is he? Very briefly, in the comics, he's only about 5'3". He's very muscular. He's very fierce. He has no recollection of his history or where he's from or who he is, which makes him a very interesting character, almost like kind of a born supremacy type thing. He doesn't know who to trust, so he doesn't trust anybody. He's a renegade. He's a rebel. He's a very interesting character. We also have to talk about his mutant powers. He's somebody that has incredible regenerative abilities. He can heal very well. If he's cut right in front of you, he will heal. He also is very slow to age. He has incredible senses, particularly sense of smell. Wolverine underwent this very serious surgery from the United States military. They were trying to make him into a Weapon X to be more specific. Because he has these incredible healing abilities, they were going to cut him open and graft this unbreakable metal called adamantium to his bones to make him even a more effective weapon. It was never really discussed, although most people assumed that the claws that he had were part of this weaponization process. I mean, it makes perfect sense. He's going to be a weapon, so he needs some sort of attacking mechanism, and so it was just assumed that they had installed these claws into his body because he could withstand the pain and all this stuff. But here's where I'm going to describe how the bone claws, although it does not seem to be very popular, especially with the fans, is really not the movie's fault. In X-Men, the second series, issue 25, this was based off of a joke that some of the writers were having. They said, well, look, Magneto, which is another one of the characters, can control all of the, he's a big magnet, basically. He can control metallic objects. And Wolverine has this metal in his body. Why doesn't Magneto just rip the metal out of Wolverine? So in issue 25, this is exactly what happens. And that's when we're sort of revealed that Wolverine has these bone claws. So it's really not the movie that added the bone claws. I mean, the Marvel Universe added the bone claws, and I think a lot of the fans were kind of disappointed at that time. Unfortunately, Marvel has sort of this tradition and history of taking perfectly good characters and throwing things in there that frankly kind of mess them up. I mean, look at Spider-Man, for example. In Sam Raimi's version of the Spider-Man movie, the writers and Sam Raimi and all these people decided that, he's Spider-Man. He doesn't need web cartridges. He was bit by a radioactive spider. He has the spider sense. He can shoot web from his hands. And I think the fans, nobody cared that it was a little bit different from the source material because it was an improvement. Lots of source material is not quite as good as what maybe the filmmakers do with it, believe it or not. I know we're always taught to believe that the book is always better, but look at Old Boy, which is a movie out of South Korea from 2003, also based on a comic book. Most people would agree that the movie really is a lot better than the comic book. There's plenty of other characters that the movie kind of changed or manipulated, and you can argue whether it's for better or worse, but the last I'll kind of talk about is Deadpool, just because he is so central to the plot. He's the Frankenstein of the movie. He's the creation from the weapons department, and he can't do half of those things. I mean, he can't shoot lasers out of his eyes. He can't do a lot of these things. And it seems that what they really needed was kind of a finale, and they just kind of kept adding things on to Deadpool so that they'd have a more interesting finale. This is a pretty good segue into the plot of the movie. I think a lot of choices were made because they were thinking too much about the outcome and not enough about the movie and how to get there. The plot, it's complicated because since this is a prequel, they had the Bryan Singer movies, they knew where those movies started, so they knew where this movie had to end. A lot of the movie was spent just getting there and not necessarily in an organic way, just existing as a movie in itself. One of the examples is, I'll go with the memory piece. Wolverine doesn't have his memory. That's one of the things that makes him very interesting. He's this vigilante weapon who's just on, the run, and he's loose, and he's trying to learn his past. In the comics, the way that he loses his memory is just through this horrific surgery that he goes through, where they're, grafting this metal to all of his bones, including his skull and everything else. In the film, they changed this so that he still had that memory. I think they did it for plot reasons. It was easier for the plot to continue if he could still remember what his goals were and where he was going. And then in the end, you have the villain walking around saying, well, I have this bullet, it's this adamantium bullet, and I'm going to go put it through Wolverine's head because I won't kill him, but at least he'll forget. And it's like, do you really care that there's a lot of other people that saw all the things that you did, and there's this whole facility here and all this stuff. Is it important that Wolverine forgets? Maybe you don't want him coming after you. For me, it felt more like they needed him to forget because that's where the X-Men movie starts. They needed him to forget. So, and by the way, this is one of my pet peeves. When you're going to put a bullet through somebody's head and that's how they forget, I don't think that's a good explanation. I don't like it because, you put a bullet through somebody's head, they still know how to walk, they still know the English language, it's the most coincidental bullet that ever goes through somebody's head, that they just lose part of their, memory, and that specific part that needs to be lost. I'm also curious, the whole movie, they have this guy who's a really, really good shot, and they have this silver bullet, basically, this adamantium bullet that they don't use until after the straight shooter and the good shot is dead. If I was the villain, I would have been like, oh, hey, by the way, you're a good shot. I have this gun that could probably kill Wolverine, or at least render him pretty, helpless. But instead, he just waits and uses himself. There's things like this. They're just like, this was not thought of, very well. But I don't want to be too punishing on the plot, because the plot, I don't think people see movies like this for the plot. Again, these characters are what's famous, and people want to see the character pieces. They're action character pieces. I don't know if that makes sense, but people don't go, I don't think, for a really, really sophisticated, really intense plot. So I'm not going to be too punishing there. What I will say, just since people do go to these action movies for special effects and the spectacle, if you're going to rely on that stuff and you're not going to think that much about the plot, you really have to make sure that the special effects are good. You can't have a scene in there where Wolverine's in the bathroom and it looks like, they painted the claws in with Crayola after the print was made. Overall, you have a movie that is full of action. I think the scene where Wolverine is flying through the air at the helicopter and that whole battle sequence is really interesting. The action is pretty good. The special effects are mostly good. There's a couple parts where you're like, oh no. But, the characters, I think largely there was a lot of opportunity missed. So at the end of the day, you, at the end of a review, want to know if you should see the movie or not. I would say if you are somebody who is not terribly familiar with the source material, and you just want to see a good action movie, a superhero movie with explosions and things like that, I think you should see it, primarily because I really like Hugh Jackman, and I think that he should be supported. He seems like a great guy. But for people who really liked these and these characters, and who grew up on these characters, and who, when their friends came over, all played games revolving around these characters, I think you're going to be frustrated. I think you're going to be disappointed. I don't necessarily recommend it. Sorry, Hugh Jackman. But I think that, I don't know, out of 5 stars, I give it 2. There are definitely worse movies out there, but I think that there are a lot of missed opportunities with this movie. So, having said that, thank you for tuning in to The First Response. We'll do more of these movie reviews. Don't forget, you can email us at thefirstresponse@gmail.com, or feel free to post your comments or video comments below. Thank you very much.